All right, we're going to start our last panel now. And this one is, let's see, where am I? Sorry. What is this? Okay, this panel is AgTech and Sustainability. And it's an eclectic collection of thought leaders in Hawaii. And let me introduce you to them. The moderator will be Mitch Rubin. Mitch leads Elemental Accelerator's food, agriculture, and nature-based solutions portfolio. He has spent his career both operating and supporting a variety of startups and helps Elemental's portfolio companies connect with high-value partners and resources that address their most pressing needs. Michelle Galimba, Big Island lady, is a cattle rancher in Ka'u on Hawaii Island, where she runs Kuahivi Ranch with her brother Guy. Their family ranch provides locally grown beef to the supermarkets, farmers markets, and restaurants on Oahu and Hawaii Island. Having grown up in agriculture in Hawaii, she's got firsthand the stresses and constraints which make farming and ranching a challenge in Hawaii. Michelle has served on the state's Board of Agriculture. David Slaughter, we know from his lecture this morning, we're making him keep working, David. And then Paki Nahale-a is an interim CEO for the Global Resiliency Hub at Iole. Born and raised in Hilo boy, Nahale-a is a graduate of Kamehameha Schools and holds a bachelor's degree from University of Pennsylvania. Paki spent 30 years serving the community as director and chairman of Department of Hawaiian Homelands. He also worked extensively for charter schools. He serves on a variety of community boards and is currently a regent for the University of Hawaii. President Obama, Hawaii guy, appointed Paki to the Presidential Scholars Commission. Wow. Dr. Walter Bowen is the Associate Dean for Research at CTAR, College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources of UH. Walter has more than 30 years experience in higher education and international agriculture research to develop soil and crop growth simulation models. Walter has lived and worked in multiple countries, carrying out research and development activities, including time at the International Potato Center, the International Fertilizer Development Center, and the U.S. Peace Corps. Walter earned his PhD in agronomy from Cornell University. Please come up. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, last panel. I think a lot has been said, a lot of amazing, really valuable insights over the past couple of days, and we're going to try to hit on some things that maybe haven't been discussed as much. I think we'll repeat a couple things that are worth repeating and try to round us out and close out a great couple days. And once again, a big thank you to Jason and Jim and the organizing team. So to start,
can you make a starting announcement asking the audience for their questions?
This is a starting announcement asking the audience for their questions. I do have my phone on me. I'll be able to pull it out, try to leave about 10 minutes or so towards the end of this. So feel free to send some in. So to round out, we really want to talk about sustainability. It's been talked about a lot. Want to ground us once again in what sustainable agriculture means. It's obviously become quite a buzzword these days. So I'm going to pull from a definition that the USDA has put together, and I'm just going to read it to help frame the conversation a little bit. So sustainable agriculture was addressed in the 1990 Farm Bill, and under that law, it means an integrated system of plant and animal production practices having a site selection application that will, over the long term, do 5 things. 1 is satisfy human food and fiber needs. 2, enhance environmental quality and the natural resource base upon which the agricultural economy depends. 3 is make most efficient use of non-renewable resources and on-farm resources and integrate natural biological cycles. 4 is to sustain the economic viability of farm operations. And 5, enhance the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole. And I think we talked about in our little pre-meeting that David brought up that it's not just farmers, right? We have to enhance the quality of life for farm workers as well. So important to keep that in mind. The other framing I just want to have is what is considered ag tech? And we have heard so many different types of ag tech. I think it's important to keep in mind the range. So from plant breeding, biotech, and CRISPR, nanosensors, closed environment agriculture, irrigation support, biocontrol, and then all the way on, more of the natural side to the Ahupua system, the fish pond technology, these are things that have been around, as was talked about, for over 1,000 years, and they are all part of ag tech and innovation. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that there is an urge when we think of ag tech around the need to automate and optimize and increase efficiency and scale, and those are all true, but to what point, right? I think you run into the potential for that to go too far and to lead to negative unintended consequences, which we'll get into in a little bit. So, for this panel, I really want it to be more around what are the considerations that needs to be made around implementing these ag technologies and doing so in a way that is enhancing those sustainability criteria that we talked about. So it's implementing and it's designing the processes for doing that. And there are a number of things we want to hit on, and we have a great panel that I think represents a lot of different perspectives. So I want to start with the farmers. And I'm going to pass it over to Michelle. So, Michelle, what considerations need to be made for farmers when trying to implement these new ag technologies?
Thanks, Mitch. And I think, you really hit on a lot of things already that I was wanting to talk about. So thanks for that. But I think, there's some really basic things, and Richard Ha, who started this whole conference out, has a very famous saying that if the farmer can make money, then the farmer's going to farm. Like, it's super basic like that. And I think ag tech is the same way. I mean, we keep hearing the last couple of days about how Hawaii farmers are slow to adopt ag tech, and it's like, no, actually, we'd be all over it if it was useful and appropriate tech. We're not slow. We don't like to work just like everybody else. We want things to be easy. Maybe we do like to work a little bit. That's why we're in agriculture. But it's not like we're adverse to having tools to make things easier. It's just that, as some of the speakers in the previous panel said, Hawaii, we have all these weird things that we grow, and we're off in the middle of the ocean. We don't have a huge customer base, so we don't necessarily have the money to attract some of the first wave of ag tech. So, hopefully there will be some agricultural technology that is appropriate to Hawaii, and I'm sure that, there's a young generation of farmers coming in, and that they will be all over it. And I really wanted to bring up something that David talked about in the very beginning of his talk, which I thought was really great. And he talked about the grand trade between intimate knowledge and like high tech. And I think that's just such a, I would hope that that's what will happen, that intimate knowledge that farmers and ranchers have can be respected and incorporated into technology rather than sort of brushed onto the side and make everything the same. I mean, there's that tension there, but I think it's really important to keep that knowledge of the intricacies of the ecosystems that ranchers and farmers work with.
Thanks, Michelle. Really appreciate that. Another area that has been hit on throughout the conference, but I think we can dive a little deeper on, is the community angle. And what Paki, I'm directing this to you, what really needs to be considered top of mind when designing with engaging communities in AgTech?
Well, first, thank you very much for the invitation. When I got invited, I'm like, well, I'm not really a farmer, nor am I a particularly high-tech guy. But in further conversations, this was the topic, I think, that Jim thought, maybe I could contribute to, which I appreciate that you just wanted to have that voice here. As was shared in the introduction, I'm overseeing the Ahupua'a of Iole. It's also the name of our nonprofit. And the main founding principle of our organization and of our stewardship of that land is that we put the aina first. Helia ka'aina, he kawa ke kanaka, that the land is chief, and we, the humans, are the servants of that. And I'm saying that when you ask me about community, because I think from a Hawaiian lens, the land is family, right? And so you treat it with a certain level of reverence and respect. And even if your worldview wouldn't view land at that level, I think it's clear that we need to have higher reverence for land. And it's one of the things I'd like to see elevated in these conversations is what does the land need? Everyone references the conditions we're in, but we don't talk about it, in my opinion, like as a personification, with the appropriate awareness that everything we're talking about only exists if we're in right relationship with land, right? So how do we do that? So how does that relate to your community question, right? So for me, Ahupua'a is at the lowest level a land division. What Ahupua'a really is community. So Iole is a community that's putting that land division first. And when you do that, I think not only are you sustainable, but abundance is created from that model. And as we work with our neighbors in Kohala and on Hawaii Island, that's the stance we want to come from, that we've taken care of our place, we're not extracting from it, we're creating more than we need that we can share, and then from that space of strength, I think we can be better partners with community, or if we want to ask community for support, we're standing on a strong foundation.
Thank you, Paki. Really, really good grounding there. I want to pass it over to Walter. You have a wide range of experience working with farms in all types of different geographies and sizes, and bring a lot of great perspective from CTAR. So maybe you can talk about it from an institutional perspective as well as just any other additional insights.
Okay, this is on? Yes, great. Well, first of all, let me thank you for putting this together. The High Plan has done an excellent job, and what I like is here we just heard about the community, and the community really is the plural sector, where you have the public, the private sector, and the plural sector. And we have businesses, we have state governments, local governments, we have federal government, we have the community represented here, and so I applaud you for bringing us all together, and I would vote for having this on a regular basis. So thank you very much. I think it's been a great job. Well, having said that, when I first looked at the title and the challenge here, the first thing that came to mind, because I finished reading a book that maybe some of you have read, It came out last October. This is Patrick Sullivan, wrote a book. He's the founder of Oceanit. And it's with the headquarters located in Honolulu, but it's a global high technology firm. And the title of his book is Intellectual Anarchy, The Art of Disruptive Innovation. If you haven't read the book, I think because it's from Hawaii, it's about doing business and doing innovation in Hawaii. So I would encourage you to look up Patrick Sullivan's book. In the book, he starts it off with a quote from Winston Churchill, and I think it goes to the heart of the difficult period we're in right now. It says Winston Churchill said, a pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity, an optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. And I think we should keep that in mind. We need to remain to be optimistic. We need to be talking across sectors. We need to be working together. So I'd also like to add a little more context to this too, is that we should be looking at history as well. Hawaii has many, many unique characteristics. It's hard to compare it to any state or any location on the mainland. And I think, we really have to play at what's unique, and we have to recognize the uniqueness, but we have to remain engaged with the rest of the world. The place I would put, if you're looking at it in terms of sustainability, I think what's really critical is that we sustain our society. There is I think we've never come so close to an actual breakdown, and we may be in the midst of it. But I'm an optimist, so of course discount that. But if you look at, say, 1900, U.S. farm land, there were 5.7 million farms. The contribution to the U.S. GDP of agriculture was 15.5%. Today, it's 0.9%, and there are 2 million farms. So almost down to a third. Now, we also had the labor force that was devoted to agriculture was 15.5% of the labor force devoted to agriculture in 1900. Only 1.1% of the labor force was devoted or is devoted today to agriculture. The I mentioned the number of farms, but the population at that time in 1900 was 76 million. Today it's 325 million. So the ratio of consumer to producer to farmer supply to food in 1900 was 13-1. So one farmer provided the food for 13 people in the U.S. Today, it's one farmer provides the food for 159 people. So it's over these 117 years, there's been tremendous advance. Most of that advance was an increase in total productivity due to a mix of mechanical, biological, chemical, and information technologies. There was the coming online of the Haber-Bosch process so that we could actually produce nitrogen to fertilize plants. Many of you may not know this, but in the early 1900s, people were screaming about not having enough food, that there just was not enough nitrogen to grow enough maize or any of the non-legume crops to feed people. And so that's why there was a concerted effort on developing a way to come up with nitrogen, because there's not enough in guano. A lot of that was being taken from South America, and there's not enough in the legume crops that they would rotate in those cropping systems. So that was just an example of one technology. Then, of course, there was the hybridization of maize, coming up with short stature wheat, and there have been myriad examples of technologies that actually produced quite a wave up until around 1970, 1980 in terms of productivity. Well, what's a bit frightening is that productivity has dropped off. The pace of that productivity has dropped off. And just at the time that we need to be devoting more effort to understanding why, and then also addressing the concerns we have about global change, the support through research and development, public research and development supported by governments, has dropped off in the U.S. It's now, here's another example. In the year 2000, the U.S. was devoting $5 billion to agricultural research and development. China was devoting $2.5 million, and the European community was devoting $6 million. So the European Union community had the greatest investment in R&D. It's followed by the U.S., China, and then Brazil and India, way down the list. Well, today, China is the world's largest financer of public agricultural research and development. It's $10 billion versus the U.S. has maintained, in terms of real inflationary adjusted money, is still at $5 billion. In the meantime, the European nations have gone up to $8 billion, and the Brazil and India have gone from both around $1.8 billion in 2000 to $3.2 billion in Brazil and $2.9 billion in India. So the dynamics are, it's an ever-changing situation. But what is critical, because we got to where we are today because of this emphasis on research and development. And then also the fact that we've had supporting institutions and services that have worked with our input industries, with our farmers, and with our agro-processing and markets. So there's been a framework that basically has been demand-led that has allowed the farm to produce more due to these supporting industries, right? Law from supporting institutions, our universities, our land-grant universities, market information. All of that has been critical to functioning, to allowing us to produce enough food to feed a growing population, and then also facilitating services. So as long as we can maintain those and strengthen those and keep these linkages going in this demand pull process, we have an opportunity. But we really need to put more emphasis on our research and development and disseminating the results of that research and development to the farmers. So sorry, that was a bit longer than I...
No, it's helpful. It's a lot of good information there. David, I know this is your trifecta appearance right here, but curious, after maybe, we've gone through a lot and you've talked a lot about the technology side, but from the tech provider, the solution provider perspective, what considerations do you think they need to have in mind on both the design and implementation side?
I think that, to get to your point, it's really critical that the technology is really serving the need. Yeah. It's really interesting, you kind of talked about the history of ag and technology. 20 years ago, startups really were not a major player in the process, so it was mostly government doing the research. But startups now are a really dominant element in a lot of what's going on. But we do have to be very careful those solutions. So we see a lot of applications coming out where we don't have the knowledge of agriculture specifically. There's a lot of tech transfer coming in from other areas of tech. So I met a person who had expertise in sensing of dollar bills for ATM machines, and then transferred that over to trying to build a machine for doing weed control, because weeds are green, right? So we see this, and then sometimes handing that off to a farmer, and you can get these cases where maybe it works a little bit and not. There was an example of some technology they were developing using machine learning out of Australia, and So big machine learning usually takes millions of examples, right? So they had collected millions of examples in Australia, and then they brought it to the US to test it, and it failed on day one. So we have to be really careful that we're developing appropriate technology, and appropriate is going to mean a lot of things. One, it's got to be solving what really needs to be solved from the local perspective. It has to not have unintended consequences. So we need it to be sustainable across the resource side and the environment side. And when we're talking about sustainability, we're looking at, optimistically, the infinite timeline. So it really has to have lasting power. And it's also going to be really important that we don't forget our knowledge of the past. And the example would be glyphosate, which is an herbicide. And we had what's called Roundup, which was the trade name, right? And we had Roundup-ready crops. And it became really easy to use a Roundup-ready crop and use Roundup. And so what happened? Well, it was widely adopted because it was easy. And we stopped collectively as a country remembering integrated pest management and crop rotation, all of these stewardship things that we've known for a long time. And ultimately, that technology died because we now have 48 species of weeds that are resistant to glyphosate, which the scientist, the biologist says, well, that's very unlikely because of the way the mechanism of the herbicide should work. It's going to be hard to do that. There was all this, oh, that shouldn't happen. But when you have this huge group of people all using the same thing. So it's a complicated answer to your question, but I think we have to be very careful that the technology is solving the problem that we want, and that it's really effective, and be very careful that we don't have unintended consequences, and that it's hopefully good for the long term.
Thanks.
I wanted to just add
Go.
to that, which is that it's actually bringing back something that happened yesterday, which was like a question to the panel, which is kind of, I think, a little bit of an odd question, but it actually got me thinking. I was talking to there was a question from the audience to the breeders about, how can seed savers help with climate change? And I think that was sort of, the sort of paradigm was too strange. But I think it kind of pointed to something which is, and it's really relevant to Hawaii. I think that the community and sort of individual farmers want to play a part in the technology, not just sort of have to just adopt it, but actually have an active part in being a part of the solution and adding their value to it, which I think you're also pointing towards.
That's a great point, Michelle.
It kind of gets to your idea of community in a sense, right? It's the ideal expert system, right? If I was trying to build an expert system for ranching in Hawaii, where would I go? Well, I have this expert, right? And so if you're, in the Bay Area, the mainland, right, and you have this idea, and you come in applying your green dollar bill technology to spray weeds on her ranch, without talking to her, the fact that, oh, well, this one actually doesn't have as much chlorophyll and so forth, right? So, the ideal expert system is going to build upon the expertise, and if you're really looking at a complete solution, then you're going to want to bring in all the experts.
Yeah, I'm curious, maybe Paki or Michelle, to go further on that. What type of advice would you give for actualizing that process of happening? And maybe you've seen it from others who have been trying to get a certain type of technology off the ground and approached in a different way, or maybe you haven't seen it done in the way that you think is genuine and productive enough to really integrate the right people and stakeholders into the.
So there's such complicated issues, right? I think that's why, going back to what I said at the beginning, is when we view the land when we elevate that relationship, then I think that's what motivates us to have the intimacy that you referenced earlier, that you spoke about, and that you referenced, Michelle, is that we want to avoid technology distancing us from that intimacy. So I think to what Kaeo talked about in the last panel, one of the opportunities for Hawaii is, my experience is the small farmers have much more intimate knowledge about the land that they're farming or the crop that they're farming, right? And so that's one of the opportunities is to capture the importance of that priceless data, the day-to-day data, and then feed that into the larger system. I think that's one way. The other way, I think it's another reason why I got invited, is that we got to raise a new generation of farmers that have that value, and they are embracing tech, and that they see tech as a way for us to live in a more balanced relationship with our environment.
I'm curious, maybe David or anybody, we heard about a lot of technologies, and you were just talking about all the potential negative unintended consequences that can come from almost all of them. Are there any that any of you are particularly concerned might go down that path? Yeah, go ahead, Will.
I'm not going to answer the question directly.
Thank you.
Because I wanted just to add what was being discussed here earlier, and then we'll pick up on that question. I also just wanted to point out that there's vast interest by society in general in technologies, and there's a movement now called public interest technology, and they're advocates for the technology contributing to the design, deployment, and regulation in a way that's responsible and equitable. And this is, there's a group at Stanford Social Innovation Review they've sponsored these workshops, and there's going to be a workshop starting this public interest technology movement shortly in a couple of weeks. So I think it's good to also take advantage to link to this general interest by many groups in society to begin to contribute to how a technology is developed, right? What's its purpose? How is it going to be deployed? And then, are there regulatory needs, right? But there's not a specific one.
So my specific answer would be machine learning and big data. So that example.
Oh.
To Australia? Okay, get a little closer here. So we have this fantastic opportunity. It's come to us. We should thank all the young people who like to watch or play computer games. And so when you play a computer game, you want it to be as realistic as possible. And so the shadows look realistic, and the wave action looks realistic, and all of that's happening on these things called graphical processors, GPUs. And so NVIDIA and these companies are making these incredible boards. And I talked to someone at coffee about, we're getting to the point where we'll have a processor for every fish, right, or every shrimp, right? If you're trying to track them, it's in the foreseeable future that we'll have this capability, and the algorithms and the software there such that I'm not an expert in machine learning. I kind of am an old school. I like to be able to see into the black box, but you eventually put all this data in the black box and you train it, and one of the risks from the commercial perspective, or the commercial emphasis of having things turn around really quickly and show profit early from the investment side, is that you don't do a lot of validation. And so that's really probably one of the big risks, is that we're going to be seeing, so it's a fantastic technology. We talked about GWAS and the Genome-Wide Association studies, the big data approach, and using this power to, humans have a hard time, those of us who are not chess wizards, of more than 4 dimensions, right? Thinking of 4 things at a time, and so now you're going to be able to bring in, thousands of pieces of information with maybe, weak information each individually, but collectively is very powerful to solve problems that really haven't been able to be solved before. But the big risk is that a lot of these end up being black box solutions. And black box solutions can be perfectly fine as long as they're really well validated. And agriculture is a really challenging, this is not a manufacturing facility and we're making nuts and bolts. This is really variable, and where are we about to be heading? We're about to be heading into climate change and the weather being really variable. And so, some of the machine learning things that we did at Davis were that one of the key things that the first step really in making a robust machine learning system was to look at the weather pattern currently and say, when in the past, so the idea is that you're going to build this database, and to look into your database and say, when in the past was there a period with a weather condition that's most similar to the current weather condition? And not to use just this giant collection of data, but try to use the relevant data to the current situation. And so we have to watch out for some of these machine learning systems and some of the AI things that they need to be really well validated. Some of the things academic journals would say you had to have at least 3 years of data in agronomy to publish. These are sound things that we should be thinking about in terms of some of these technologies. And I would be a little bit, that's kind of one of my bigger fears, is that we'll jump on a technology and then it could fail famously if we're not careful and do some damage.
From a farmer perspective, like it's you're talking about it on a very high level, but a lot of times, like you were showing pictures, I think of some very tricked out ATVs, and sort of from a ranch perspective, I'm like, that's going to break in like 6 months, and like nobody's going to know how to fix it, and so it'll just be like this piece of machinery. But to your question, I think one of the other risks is actually that. So, if I think farmer, there's like sort of this farm to table movement, which is great, and it has to do with farmers being able to get information to their customers. So then the customers feel connected, and you have sort of this whole different marketing and pricing opportunity. But the sort of the flip side is is also kind of a risk. And I happen to be coming out of college in 1999, and I came back to Hilo and got a job, and it was at the Papaya Administrative Committee. And that was when the GMO papayas were getting rolled out to the farmers. And, contrary to what, as I was saying, the farmers were very enthusiastic because they had a terrible problem with this ring spot disease. And so they adopted the rainbow papaya, and it worked. But there was already at the beginning, not much, but there was always this sort of suspicion amongst consumers about GMO, and then that just grew and grew over the years to the point where there was less of a market for rainbow papayas. So I think that that connection between, you have to, the technology also has to be accepted by the consumer, otherwise the farmer is sort of left out in the cold with, a product that people don't want to buy.
Absolutely. Paki, it looked like you wanted to say something before.
No, I gotta say it. I guess generically for me, I worry about ag tech that encourages or allows humans to continue to live in a way that's out of balance with our natural resources. And I think the more that ag tech is helping us, use less natural resource, versus be bigger consumers than we already are. That's a generic concern for me.
Yeah, I think that was brought up well in the panel right before this around, I think it was Kaeo talking about controlling the environment and instead of working with it.
A quick follow-up on that is I think the ag tech natural resources rarely exist, in totality on one farm. And so how do you live within the resources of your watershed and still get enough value from your acreage to produce profit? I think that's solvable, but to me, very little energy has been put into resource management across boundaries and as collectives.
That's a great point. Before I close it out with some takeaway questions to kind of sum up the experience here, I just want to open it up if there's any audience questions. Okay, if there's not, but, yeah.
There was a discussion about Roundup and glyphosate.
Right.
And I was curious, I'm curious.
Resistance, it has to be a community effort. When you can't just by yourself probably prevent this, but we have to resist the temptation to ignore our knowledge of the past and keep using the easy things. So you have to do things like rotate your crops, right? And you have to rotate your pesticides. So you have to keep using all of the things we know about integrated pest management. But it can be tricky as an individual when you're talking about resistance in the wild species, because if your neighbors aren't also being good stewards, then it can be a challenge. So, but you can, of course, speak out in the community and try to draw attention to good practices and so forth. I'm not sure, does that answer your question?
This is concerning how the state uses it. The state uses it.
Right. So you do have, the state would also have to practice, so presumably the state is using it on the side of the highway or something, right? Not for growing food, but they still would have to be a good steward of the resource. And so the state would have to have some kind of integrated pest management program. Technology can help by targeting, we've developed targeted spray, so we use less glyphosate than just a broadcast spray, but trying to use other herbicides as a rotation. If it's a highway, they can do mowing. So you have to think very broadly about what are the opportunities for alternatives to this particular tool, with the understanding that if you constantly keep using the same tool in the same application, you could build up resistance. And so it has to be collectively as a community to do that. And so there are, in Salinas Valley, they will have things where the whole community agrees not to do something before a certain date, or you can have a community approach that can do that. And so if the highway department is the largest user of glyphosate, they have a bigger responsibility, and hopefully they will be cognizant of that responsibility and use integrated pest management approaches as well. Does that answer the question?
And also, I would say, take all of this information to your representatives, and then you can have that conversation about, other alternatives to glyphosate by the state of Hawaii.
There are places in California where they have switched over to mowing. So there are communities that have made the decision to not spray. So, and Caltrans in California funded research to do targeted spray. So they actually put sensors on their trucks, and they would actually pinpoint the spray so that maybe it wasn't perfect technology, but it could, if there are not very many weeds, it could dramatically reduce the use of the material. So there are a number of things that can be done, and there are communities who've made active decisions to going to mowing, for example.
I got one more audience question here, and then a couple of these actually hit on the questions I was going to ask. But Walter, you might be able to answer this. Is anybody, and maybe you, an institution, doing a life cycle assessment on the environmental costs of all this technology, be it materials, energy, water, versus the impacts on potential improved yields? Basically, doing life cycle assessment, cost-benefit analysis, and I would throw in there on the potential social, impacts as well.
Yes, that is a rich area of research, and it's mostly related to our focus now on circular economies and the fact that you go from this linear make, waste approach to how do you continue to use the elements of any product that you're producing and put it back into the system and mimic better the natural sustainability in our natural world, right? Now, it does require mostly an economic analysis. I'm not aware of any life cycle analysis going on within CTAR right now, but UHERO, the economists there, have been looking at the circular economy approach, and life cycle analysis is a component of a tool that you can use in evaluating how economically beneficial as well as environmentally a particular circular economy technology is.
I want to wrap it up with the last question to really kind of summarize the entire conference experience. So for each of you, I'd love to, these might be one and the same question here, but what's your one key takeaway from the conference, and what makes you hopeful about ag tech in Hawaii, sustainable ag tech in Hawaii and the tropics? We can just go down the line, whoever wants to start.
Well, I'm hopeful because ultimately technology is an information-based science, and that when we have more knowledge, I think we can do a better job of achieving our goals in terms of nutrition and flavor and sustainability and social sustainability as well as economic sustainability. So, I'm an optimist, and an optimist that agriculture has an incredible potential, and that we have a lot of very, bright and innovative people. And I look at technology as a tool, and we have to be smart, to use the technology in a smart way. But I'm optimistic that it can be used to address the problems, and I think the conference did a great job of, identifying the local needs in Hawaii, and I'm not coming away thinking, oh, this is not going to be possible. I think it's definitely going to be possible. It may not be easy, but I'm very optimistic about the potential.
Honestly, I guess it was a great conference, just in that we actually sort of haven't gathered as a sort of ag community in person on the island. So I'm not, that was great, and in and of itself. And also to have like a very sort of, this is a very optimistic topic, ag tech, even, despite the complications around it, it is sort of very forward-looking, very positive solutions for the future. And that point, I think, that someone made earlier, that technology can be almost like a gateway drug to get young people into agriculture. That's something that is, I think agriculture is very satisfying, but sometimes I think there's a sort of a stigma around it. So if we can get young people involved in agriculture through technology, that would be fantastic.
I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but I think that as a race, we need to change our relationship with the environment. And I think that gap, I think, exists in the ag community as well. And I've seen and experienced that in the conference. I think we can close that gap. And it's really important to me because I don't think there's another group that has as much intimate connection with our environment. I think our farmers know the environments they work in. They pay attention to global patterns, and so they can be leaders in how we as humans change behavior. And my other takeaway, what gives me hope, is that and they're good people. I mean, it was just so nice to connect with folks face to face that I haven't seen for a while, and they're just hardworking, bright, caring, giving. They respond. They're resilient. So, what better group to lead the way to change behavior?
We live in a very sensitive environment, and the takeaway I would really try to emphasize is that anything we do, we have to pay attention to the fact that we have limited land resources, and we also have limited coastal resources. Our marine ecology is extremely important to this island, and I'm optimistic that we're going to do more integration of studies so that we really understand not only the impact of changes in land use, but what technologies could be used to do a better job of having a healthy ecosystem. And I would just add that it's also important for us to be globally engaged, and so I would say we serve Hawaii through global engagement. We need to do the best science we can do and development, and paying attention to the social concerns as well. There are unique ways of working with communities in terms of having an impact on technologies that are being proposed. And once again, community should be involved in the design, in the deployment, and any oversight regulation for technologies. So I'm optimistic, yeah.
Wonderful. What a great way to close it out. Thank you all so much for joining me up here. Thank you, everybody in the audience. And I'll pass it back to Jim.